I want to invite you this morning to think about a challenge going on in your life. Does everyone here have a challenge? If you don't, good for you. That's great. But perhaps, if not for yourself, maybe it's a challenge going on with someone you care about, or maybe there's a challenge in our country taking place that's drawing your attention. And ask yourself, is it possible that I'm seeing this circumstance incorrectly? Is it possible that there's more to see in this situation than just what I'm seeing? Is it possible even that there is some sort of good or even some sort of divine presence at work in this circumstance to bring about a greater good? Now, by that, I do not mean to infer that God gives us terrible situations to teach us lessons, or that through our thinking we create awful experiences for ourselves. If you want guilt, I have another church perhaps down the street somewhere that you can go to. But can we ascertain that the divine, even through crappy situations, can create good for ourselves and for those around us? So can you say yes to any of those questions based upon a challenge going on in your life? It's really hard for me to do, because in order to do that, I have to do three of the things that are the hardest for me to do. The first thing that I have to do is admit that I'm wrong. And I hate admitting that I'm wrong, because I'm so good at being right. I really am. So, to admit that I'm wrong is hard for my ego to do. The second thing, which is almost just as hard, is especially in a challenging situation, it's really hard for me to give up blaming someone or something else. When I don't feel good, I really like to not have to be responsible for it, to blame someone else for victimizing me or the way things are for how I feel. If I can avoid responsibility for not feeling good, I usually take that as a consolation prize and feel a little bit better. The third thing that's hard for me to do is it's hard for me to see God in a situation where I don't see God. It's hard for me to see a challenging circumstance and just say the divine is operating there when it looks like what's operating there is anything but divine, right? I will admit that third thing is actually a little easier for me to do than the first two, but they're all challenging things to do, and I think there's a great benefit if we're willing to be wrong once in a while. There is a great benefit if we're willing to give up the blame, even if just for a minute. There's some value in saying, even though I can't see God in this circumstance, I'm going to be present for her to show up sometime if she wants to. There's some value in that, and it can be pinpointed in this phrase that comes to us from a lot of different spiritual traditions, and the phrase is beyond appearances. Have you ever heard that before? Look beyond the appearance to understand or realize that there's a greater reality than just the one that you see. And if we can learn, as the great mystical and spiritual teachers of all time have taught us, to turn within, which means to begin to believe and cultivate a belief in an invisible reality, if we can do that, we can not only sometimes see or understand that greater reality, but we can start to apply it, to start to make it so. This was the spiritual message of Jesus. It was the spiritual message of Buddha, of much of what Muhammad said, of what Lao Tzu said. If you're not a student of religion and you're a student of pop culture, it's what Dumbledore teaches us. It's what Yoda teaches us. They all teach us to see beyond the appearance, to realize a greater reality that we can tap into and use to benefit us and those around us. All of these teachers were mystical teachers. They all taught that we discover God first and foremost by going within ourselves, by tapping into the inner wellspring of our being. There's a story in the Gospels many of you know about Jesus running into a woman that's at a well, and he asked her for a drink. And she said, "You're going to ask me for a drink? I'm a Samaritan." And a Samaritan was someone who was generally despised by a lot of the practicing Jews of that period. And Jesus says, you know what? I'm really wanting to offer you a drink of a different kind of water, a different kind of Kool-Aid, we might say. And Jesus' point wasn't to convert her, in my opinion, but it was to point out that there is a water available to all of us, no matter what religion you are, no matter what political party you affiliate with, no matter what gender or sexual orientation you are, that God is like to all of us if we are willing to drink of the water. And don't we all have to drink water to get by? At near the same time, maybe a little bit later, there's a similar story about the Buddha, that he's walking along and he runs into a woman by a well. And he asks her for a drink of water. And she says, you're going to ask me for a drink of water, but I'm an untouchable. I'm a lower caste than you are. And the Buddha says to her, I didn't ask you what your caste was. I just asked you for a drink of water. And there's a beauty in that story to me that says it doesn't matter what caste you are. It doesn't matter what your background is. We all drink of the same wisdom. We all have within us the same bottomless wellspring of wealth of wisdom, of love, of light, of spirit available to us. But we have to learn to turn within and sometimes go beyond the appearance of what seems to be so to find that greater truth. You know, appearances and perceptions are hard. As I was talking with someone after the first service, you know, this idea, perception is reality, it doesn't work for me. No, it's not. Our perception is our perception. And yes, life is grand, and yes, life is magnificent, and yes, life is wonderful, but you know what? Life is also a huge misunderstanding, isn't it? You see things your way, I see them my way, and sometimes they harmonize, but a lot of times there's a lot of friction that's created too, isn't there? It's not easy. And so spiritually, it's always meant so much to me in my life that I know that no matter what I'm seeing, I do believe in a fundamental reality that's made up of my virtues and values, that's made up of my faith, that's made up of a belief that life fundamentally is good, that there is a divine power available to us, that, you know, we are all connected. And if I didn't have this fundamental belief, because I don't see it around me all the time, I'd really falter in my life. So spiritually, getting beyond appearance is about getting to God as fast as we can, no matter what we're seeing around us. Pragmatically, it's realizing that life is full of these misunderstandings, and that the way you see yourself probably isn't the same way that other people see you. And the way that you see other people probably isn't the same way that they see themselves. It actually would be very frightening to me to crawl into your heads and consider what it is that you think of me. Even if it's positive, it would just kind of creep me out a little bit. Wouldn't it creep you out? Well, you're thinking it, so obviously you're there. But, you know, the other way around. I remember when I was 19 years old, one of my first major jobs is I got a job on harbor cruises. They weren't like carnival cruises, but they were harbor tours where there'd be corporate parties, weddings, things like that, and we'd go around the harbor for 3 hours or so. And I recall I had been promoted to be an event manager, and that position, you started off by being like the only person on the boat for like a party of 20, like a small corporation, and so you'd bartend, you'd put the food together, you'd go take drink orders, you'd untie the lines, you did everything but drive the boat, because you did not want me driving the boat. It wasn't a good idea. And you do it all in this costume straight out of the Love Boat. So a white jacket with hard nautical boards on the side, a big black bow tie, so you're in costume this whole time. And I remember I was really nervous for the first shift that I had. It was out of Marina del Rey, and some of my bosses were talking to the group that was going to come on, and they were all, there was this corporation of women, and they were all going to come on the boat, and they all looked like they had had 3 or 4 drinks already. And that was the hard thing, being on these these boats because you can cut somebody off, but you can't ask them to leave. You're kind of stuck with them there. There's often a lot of drinking going on. And so my bosses, who were also my friends, were talking to them, and they were all looking at me and giggling and laughing. And so I didn't feel very good when they came on. And so they came on the boat, and they all came out to the bow and untied the lines. I got out there, I started taking drink orders, and they're still giggling and laughing. I go and get their drinks. I come back. I pass them out, and one of them says, "When does the show start?" And I go, "Show? What are you talking about? I guess you're just going to have to ask your boss. I mean, there must be some sort of presentation." And they laugh and laugh. I go get some more drinks. I come back, and one of them tugs at my pant leg. And I realized in that moment that my bosses had told them that I was a stripper. They were going to get... So talk about seeing somebody in a different way than you expect, or you never know how people are going to see you. And I danced that day like I'd never danced before, and my eyes trust me, no. But of course that had to happen to me in a place where I couldn't get away. That's the thing about being on a boat, is you're stuck. And I understand that our everyday misunderstandings of one another aren't amplified perhaps to that extent, but you might be surprised. You know, the great thinker William James said, it would be a surprise to move into your neighbor's mind and see how the scenery is different there than it is in your own. And so that's part of the wisdom of getting beyond appearances. It's simply understanding that my version of reality might be closer to truth than somebody else's, but that doesn't make it necessarily so. We have to have that ability to turn into our deeper faith, especially when facing challenges, so that we can apply our faith with greater clarity and vision. Our science of mind and spirit philosophy is a mystical philosophy, which means we're a go within first philosophy. We don't teach a religious test for people. We don't think God has a religious test to be loved by God. We don't teach that you have to be of a particular faith to be loved by God. We don't think that you have to go to a certain church or have a certain pastor connect you with God. We believe that each of us finds the divine within, but we each have to go there. The master teacher, Jesus, taught that God is like a farmer who scatters his seeds across the soil. Some seeds blossom and grow into beautiful plants and trees, and some seeds don't, but the farmer is happy. The farmer is happy for what has grown. God is like this in that God plants his seeds in the souls of mankind and womankind. In some, it doesn't grow, but in others it does, and the Lord rejoices. She rejoices in that knowing that some of us were able to realize and cultivate that truth. But it's not God's job to cultivate that knowledge and truth. It's something that's left to each of us. And we do that by being willing to go beyond just what we see to find an identity and an existence in that invisible reality, which doesn't mean it's not real, mind you, but might be even more fundamentally so than anything else we may convince ourselves as so around us. In every spiritual tradition, you have some sort of prayer and meditation. And to me, how people pray and meditate is symbolic of this idea of moving beyond appearances. In every spiritual tradition I know, people close their eyes when they pray or they meditate. And why? It's this simple of saying goodbye to the reality of just our vision and turning into that inner sight. It's symbolic of moving to that place of inner knowing. And every tradition I know, practitioners either fold their legs or they often fold their hands like this when they go into prayer. Why? To me, it's symbolic of moving out of that world of a belief in separation and duality to one of oneness and connectedness. In every tradition I know, there is some sort of showing in the body of humility. In some folks, they bow their heads. In other places, people will even get on their knees and they will bow. You know, it's that idea that I put simply of saying, I'm not a know-it-all, of humbling myself before a divine presence and opening up to feel and experience, hopefully, God's grace. All of these motions are really easy to do in theory, but how about in accordance with that challenge that you're facing? Can you do that? Can you close your eyes in face of a challenge and say to yourself, there is more than what I'm seeing here, and to allow an inner reality to form in relationship to this challenge? Can you cross your legs or fold your hands and recognize that the duality and seeming separateness in this situation is an illusion in the face of the reality of unity and oneness within you? Can you humble yourself before this situation to recognize that you are not in charge of it, but indeed there is a divine presence available if we are willing to allow its forgiveness, its grace, its knowingness demonstrate itself? My experience is when we do this, it doesn't always change the challenge, but what it does do is it transforms ourselves. It helps us get to a degree where we can grow beyond the challenge, where as opposed to feeling possessed by it, we can possess it with more clarity and know what to do. And so when we transcend ourselves, it no longer has that negative kind of effect on us. I love something the writer Meredith Jordan says. She says, in the face of any situation, whatever you have forgotten, you can remember. Whatever you have buried, you can unearth. If you are willing to look deep into your own nature, if you are willing to peel away the layers of not self, you have adapted in making your way through the tribulations of life, you will find that your true self is not as far removed as you think. I love that idea and am so grateful for this idea that my true self is like an anchor. Because you know what? I'm not always behaving like my true self. Sometimes I miss out on it, but isn't it good to know that it's still there? Isn't it good to know that even when you're wrong, the truth still is? Isn't it good to know that even when you're mistaken, there's an opportunity to wake back up and see a greater truth and reality there? Some of us, I know, we're forced to live in both of those realities. But the more we move beyond appearances to nurture that reality, the more it becomes the more fundamental one in our lives. Not that long ago, I had a friend of mine get mad at me. And we haven't talked in a couple of months. And you know, when you're off with one of your friends or something, you know, you just don't really feel like you're living in harmony in your life. It becomes really challenging. And the thing I know about my friend is I'm not the first person they've had an estrangement from, so I don't take it too personally, but it kind of sucks, right, when you're going through that. And I remember going through that, and I remember talking to a friend of mine, and she's a practitioner, and her father had a stroke. And she was struggling, really struggling, obviously, because her dad couldn't speak anymore. And she was saying, I just want to communicate with my dad like I used to. And obviously, there's no really good advice that I could give, but I invited her because I knew she had a spiritual practice to take some time each morning to go to that place where she knows we're all one and see if she can meet her dad there. To take that time to meet in that meeting place of divinity, where no matter what separation we've thought to be, we can meet each other in wholeness and in oneness, and to begin to do her best to build a kind of communication there. It may not be in words, it may not be in laughter, it may not be in tears, but it may, just maybe, be the most intimate kind of communication that there can be. And we had a nice conversation, and she thanked me, and we got off the phone, and I realized the moment that I hung up that advice really wasn't for her. You know, it was for me to connect with my friend in that way. See, that's the power in moving beyond appearances. It's to begin to see that as real as things appear around us, they are not near as real as the truth and power that is within us. The walls we see out there, the ones that are there are not there yet, those are the illusions. The discrimination or the not knowing of truth or the self-deprecation that we see out there, they're facts, they're going on, but they're not the truth. I'm not one of those spiritual folks who say that there's no such thing as evil. or no such thing as hate, or no such thing as fear. But when we say that in spirituality, what we mean is that these are true realities to a degree, but in the whole, there can be no place for evil. In the whole, there can be no place for hatred. In the whole, there can be no place for fear, because there is only room for one thing, and that's the truth of our being. So any relationship you've allowed yourself to seem fractured on the surface, remember that there is only that wholeness within. And wherever you look into your families or into your relationships and you sense disharmony or separation, know that at truth, connections never end or never die. And when you look at your country, and perhaps you're concerned or struggling with what's going on, remember that liberty and freedom and justice cannot be torn asunder by any person, individual, or group think. It is the very truth of who and what you are. If you don't see God in your life, show up for that divine presence to demonstrate itself in, through, and as you. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, says in today's 365 Science of Mind, a daily guide for spiritual practice, he says, when we let the love that is within us go out to the God who is in all people and the divine presence that it is in all things, then we are loving God with all our heart and with all our soul and mind, because we recognize that the Spirit within us is the same Spirit that we meet in others. This is loving our neighbors as ourselves. And so, just closing in some prayerfulness, I'm going to continue to read some of the words of Holmes, and you're welcome to join me in making them your own. The love that is within me goes out to the God who is in all people. I recognize the divine presence everywhere. I know that it responds to me, and I know that there is a law of good, a law of love, forever giving of itself to me. This divine and perfect law is circulating through me now. Its rhythm is in my heartbeat. Its perfection is manifest in every organ, action, and function of my body. Love and perfect life circulate through everything. This love and this life I accept as the truth about myself now and forever. And so I speak to my understanding of divinity, and I give thanks for being wrong. I give thanks for knowing that at times I don't see the complete picture, because I am so thankful that there is more. I am so grateful to give up blame, to take responsibility in this moment, no matter what anyone has done, to be responsible for my own heart, my own mind, my own body, my own way of being in this world. And oh, I am so grateful to know that even when I do not see the divine is there, calling me thither to be a presence for its love, its truth, its beauty, its freedom, its inclusiveness, its goodness. In gratitude for this oneness, for the truth beyond all appearances that makes all things one and all things whole, I am so grateful, and so it is. Amen.